Now, the next organism we're going to talk about is Gardnerella. And while Gardnerella is not a sexually transmitted disease, you are going to have to differentiate it from sexually transmitted diseases. So I'm going to go through, we'll talk about some of the features. The features are that these are gram-negative rods, pleomorphic, meaning sometimes they're short, sometimes they're long, and they're normal flora of the vaginal mucosa. So the species specific here that we're talking about is Gardnerella vaginalis. And what's happening is that at some point during the lifetime of the female, the flora gets a little bit disturbed. That could be from antibiotics, that could be from stress, that could be from menses, for example. And when the flora changes up, Gardnerella, along with other species of normal flora, will start to overgrow. And that's really what we're talking about for Gardnerella vaginalis. So they are typically polymicrobial infections, although if you're asked for a diagnosis for BV, bacterial vaginosis, they're usually asking you about Gardnerella vaginalis. But they work together with other organisms of the flora, specifically the lactobacilli, mobiluncus, Bacteroides, and Peptostreptococcus can all be associated with the development of BV. Now, what happens is, again, when the pH gets disturbed, so the pH starts to increase, you'll start to get the reduction of the normal flora lactobacilli, and that's going to allow the overgrowth of some of these other organisms. So the disease itself is bacterial vaginosis, also we call that sometimes BV. And how is it characterized? It's characterized by a discharge. Now, we've already talked about discharge with gonorrhea. We said it was a very mucoid, purulent discharge. Here, the discharge is a thin grayish fluid, okay? And I skipped ahead and talked a little bit about chlamydia, and I said that there was a discharge there that was more kind of whitish, okay? You're also going to have a discharge with trichomonas, and that's going to be probably the leading thing you're going to have to differentiate between bacterial vaginosis and trichomonas. Now, with Gardnerella vaginalis, which remember is not sexually transmitted, with Gardnerella you have this thin grayish fluid, but also it's malodorous, so you're going to have a distinct odor with bacterial vaginosis. So the reason I mention that is because trichomonas, remember, there is also a distinct odor with that disease, but the discharge in that case is described as kind of a frothy yellow-green discharge, as opposed to this thin gray discharge with bacterial vaginosis. Diagnosis, you definitely want to know, are something called clue cells. So here's a picture, an image of what we would call a clue cell. In a normal smear of the vagina, you would look for epithelial cells, and in a healthy vaginal mucosa, you would see epithelial cells covered with a few bacteria. A clue cell is an epithelial cell covered with bacteria, so you can hardly even see the cytoplasm of that epithelial cell. So that's a clue cell. pH can also be helpful in diagnosis, greater than 4.5, so again, we're increasing the acidity there. But as far as Gardnerella vaginalis goes, you're going to be looking for the clue cell. So how are they going to make this clinically relevant, putting it to a vignette for you? They may describe the disease. You've got a female. She's got this thin grayish discharge, and it's malodorous. And then they might want to know which of the following would be diagnostic for the above. And they might mention clue cells. They might mention motile trophozoites. They might mention, a Zank smear, for example. That's used in herpes diagnosis. So again, we're looking more towards that second order type question where you have to make the diagnosis and then answer something else about the specific question. Now, how are we going to treat it? We're going to have to treat it with metronidazole or clindamycin. Remember, a lot of the times we can get BV from the use of antibiotics, especially broad-spectrum antibiotics that are going to kill off a lot of the vaginal flora except for Gardnerella.